Okay, committee, we'll bring the meeting back to order. So next order on agenda is item number 8. Item number 6. No, 8, I was correct. School Facilities Commission Annual Report. So Director, please give us your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are going to turn this over to Laura to start walking us through the process, and I'll have a few comments along the way.
Okay. Ms. Anderson, please.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to refer you on a couple of changes. The commission made some changes on their recommendations and they inadvertently did not get included. So we gave you 2 handouts. There's one that is the executive summary that we gave you an update with the changes in it. So that's not the one that's in the packet. And then additionally, we gave you this morning, there's a stapled packet that looks like this with a note on the bottom that says corrected copy of 8/31/21. When we get to the budget section at the very end, we'll be using this section. This includes those changes as well.
Now, I did download revised ones from the website. Are those the up-to-date ones? Okay, thank you.
Very well then.
Okay, continue.
We'll start with tab 1. And page 1, that is the executive summary. So you'll need that extra, the separate sheet that includes those changes that the commission made on their recommendations. And I don't know how far you'd like me to go into each of these. This is just an overview by category of the budget request, but then at the very end, we go through all of the specific requests. So how detailed would you like me to be, Mr. Chairman?
I don't really want a lot of detail unless it's requested by committee members in
Okay.
any particular area. So yeah, keep it high level.
Okay, perfect. So we'll just go through and in the budget requests, there'll be the operations budget, which allows us to go ahead and operate. It has all of our support costs, travel, positions, all of those sorts of things in it. The budget that's listed here, the $6,350,451 is an estimated cost. The budget office has not yet provided us a complete standard budget. They're working towards that. I just recently got the 100 series, which is all the positions and salaries and everything reconciled with them, but there's still a couple of sections that they haven't finished. So I don't actually have that. That's my best estimate. So just to let you know, that will be changing.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sanderson, would you be so kind as you go through, can you let us know what page you're on as we get on through it?
I thought I said, I'm sorry, Mr.
Page 1.
Page 1?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on page 1. I'm just afraid I'll
Yes.
get lost on going forward.
I heard
Okay.
Senator Hutchins' note earlier and I made note of that. And I'm also going to try and slow down.
Peter already, so thank you for that. Appreciate it.
I'll keep her in line in case she.
He'll kick me under the table or something. So the next one is the engineering and technical section. And we have a request of $5,222,753. This is one of the items that the commission made a change to. They added $4 million to that request from what you had previously seen in June. And as we discussed at the June meeting, all of those were preliminary numbers and the commission hadn't seen them yet. So this is then now reflecting the changes that the commission made. The third one is the major maintenance, which I know is major maintenance has been a topic of discussion today. We have a standard budget at $153 million and the request will be $5,665,715. The charter school leases is a request of $1,866,764. The modular leases, $109,625. We have an addition in there, number 6, which is capacity. This is for $6 million. This is a supplemental budget for Coyote Ridge, which is directly related to the pandemic-driven costs, which Director Vincent will address when we get to that item. The district component request, this is another item that changed from the preview that you saw in June. This was $13,347,649. However, the commission, in noting, they also noted that taking care of our buildings and doing the major maintenance and having those component projects and keeping the buildings in shape and protecting our assets is very important. And so they decided to go further down the list than what we had recommended. So that request is changed to $20,826,457. And then the planning funds are $300,000. That allows the commission to do Mercer studies and to take action when they feel it's necessary. Likewise, the Land Opportunity Fund, I know that's a strange dollar amount to have in there, 618,351. But what that does is it replaces exactly what was spent this biennium to bring us back up to a pot where they have an amount that they can take care of opportunities as they see them. Moving along to page 2. The unanticipated request is $1,504,411. And that is calculated based on all the projects that we're requesting to account for unforeseen expenses and cost overruns or anything that may come up for the projects that you appropriate for. And then the last one is the other budget considerations. And like we discussed earlier, it's the commission has purview. They can recommend projects based on capacity or condition. This one's a little bit out of the norm because it's not really either. However, this is the loss of the leased land that the Little Powder River School is sitting on. And so when that school ceases to exist because we can't renew the lease, we will have a capacity problem with it. And therefore, we discussed this, I believe, in June as well, that we're requesting the new school, the design and construction, as well as the demolition of the old school, which was part of the lease that we have to clear the site when we leave it. So the total for all of those requests, everything put together, is $212,890,381. Are there any questions on the overview for the budget?
And how much is that over the standard budget?
Trying to remember the exact total. Sorry, I don't do it that way because we have to back out the
Yeah.
just back out the standard budget numbers. I
Standard.
believe it's around. I want to say, I apologize. I'll have to get that figure for you.
Okay, that's right. Committee, any questions? No questions? Okay.
All right, we'll move along to tab 2.
Mr. Chairman. I
Oh,
got one.
okay. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This really goes, it's a much larger question and it's not directly at you. However, it's a question that I've asked in all the other committees I've been in so far. When you're looking at your 100 series funding, what kind of impact is that having on your recruiting and the ability to recruit quality individuals?
Would you like me to answer that? Would you? Yeah,
Yeah,
So-
briefly, but it's good for every single committee member because it's getting tougher and tougher.
we are currently down, I think it's 5 positions at the moment. And the last one we've lost in the last 4 or 5 years, we've lost at least 2 or 3 to school districts that can pay more money than we can, to be honest with you. And we lost another one who they had a family emergency that they left the state. And
Yeah, we're almost 35, 36% down and turnover, just almost just before I came on board. And we were hoping to slow that tide, but it's not, it's stemmed the tide. So we have 28 employees and then there's 5 vacancies within the 28 right now. And then, and then with that, we advertised for the school facilities administrator twice. Once we got 19 applications, could not find a candidate. The second time we advertised, we retooled it to kind of construction, architecture, engineering part out because we're the state construction department. It was more school, K-12, higher ed, administration. Got 52 of them and found 3 candidates to interview, 2 to call back for second round interview. And we just made an offer to 1. So it's difficult. It's very difficult to compete on the school side with what the K-12 and higher ed environment can pay. Yeah, and I've made the statement that I've been here a whole 4 months now. I think if we had large construction companies headquartered in Cheyenne, that our state side of the house would get picked apart too. All of our construction project managers over there. Now somebody wants to change jobs. I get to pick up, I have to relocate, sell the home, buy another home, that kind of thing. Otherwise, in my mind, our state side of the house would get fleeced just as much as the K-12.
Thank you.
And I do have an answer for your question over the standard. I just had to find it on my sheet. Over the standard budget, which includes the 153 million as the standard for major maintenance, the requests are $52,317,177. Any other questions on that before we move along to tab 2? All righty. We'll start going through the Financials, these are as of the end of June. So on page 5 page 3 in tab 2, the very first one is an appropriations executive summary. It takes the operations, the major maintenance, and the capital construction and combines them into a summary. And generally, I'd like to point out too, in column C, the very end, you'll see that since the inception, since 2003, the legislature has appropriated over $3.5 billion that we've managed to get out into the schools. On page 4, we take that executive summary and then we take each section and pop it out so that we're looking at that individually. This is our operations appropriation summary. It just details out our appropriations and our expenditures. A lot of times what we're looking at there is the expenditures for the current period. And I always go back and check and see where we're at within the last, like the same month, the previous 2 years, just to make sure that our expenditures are in line. And if there's any anomalies, that I'm identifying those and making sure that we know what those are. And these are right in the middle of where we were the last couple of years. The next page, on page 5, is the major maintenance appropriation summary report. I'll draw your attention to column E there. You'll see that total is that the districts have expended is $795 million. However, that was the expenditure total from last year, of June 30th of last year. And the reason being is they have until July 30th to get us those figures. And so a little bit later in the financials, we'll see the major maintenance report for this year. Moving along to page 6 is the capital construction appropriation summary. And one of the things that I'm always monitoring there is both columns D and column F, the expenditures for the current period and the balance not expended. We go through and we're trying to analyze those old appropriations. And we want to make sure those things are going down and going away. For instance, just even on this one, that oldest appropriation there in 1112, which is $4,500, is now down this month to like $2,600. And we have one project left, I think, in there, and there's been an issue that we're trying to move that one off the books. Moving along to page 7. This is the capital construction transaction summary report. And if you look at column B there, what we're really doing is just showing when we move stuff from budgeted and then we get a contract that's awarded and we move it up into the awarded category. And that's really what we're monitoring for the most part there. In this particular month, the majority of that, 2.3 million, is $1.7 million of that was for the Jackson High Middle School, which is about 74% of those moves, and then the rest of them were smaller. The details of those are on pages 12 through 17 of this report, if you're interested in any of the details. Moving along to page 8, on pages 8 through 11, this is an accounting of all of the unanticipated funds. So for those of you that might be new committee members, when we ask for those unanticipated funds to take care of project overruns, those can only be used for the projects that were appropriated during that session. And we monitor here any changes that may be made in that session. However, in the last month, there were none. So these pages are basically blank on all of those transactions, or most of them. Moving along then to page 12, 12 through 17 is just the details of those awarded funds and the transfers. And then if we move along to page 18 through 28, this is a listing we run every month that shows all of the appropriations by building, by district. Are there any questions on those? Seeing none, I'll move along. We'll move along to page 19, or pardon me, 29. This is the major maintenance report that I made reference to a moment ago. So the districts by the end of July have to report to us what their expenditures were for the fiscal year. This is just the one fiscal year. You'll see in column A is the district, and B is where they're reporting those expenditures, and then C is the total interest earned in that account that they have segregated. And then they add those together to get their ending bank balance report for the districts. And then in column E, we add in what their first quarterly payment was, which we just made in July, to give you a better ending total of where they should be sitting with their major maintenance accounts. Are there any questions on this one? All right, moving along then to page 30. This is a listing of any of the expenditures for the emergency funds that were expended during this last fiscal year, because sometimes districts will have an emergency, something that prevents them from opening school. Maybe a heater completely goes out in the middle of winter or something along those lines. And the commission has an account for emergency funds that they have access to that they can help alleviate those situations. However, fortunately, we have not had to touch that this year, so there are none.
Mr. Chairman.
Moving along.
Senator
Pardon?
Landon.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt and can I take you back to page 29?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Anderson? And then my question is, total interest earned in a year, it just piqued my interest, this column on interest. Bighorn 4 with $32,000 in interest, that's way above anybody else. I'm just wondering how they did that. Also, it's interesting to see that Goshen was way up there. Any thoughts about interest payments? Is that because they have bigger funds set aside, or?
Perhaps they have it in an account with a better interest rate. I can't tell you. That's like 48 school districts and they all do their own accounting. We just get them to report to us the totals. I have no idea how their finances work on them or how they would accrue that amount of interest. It is interesting though.
So if we want whoever that person is that's getting that kind of return, we'd have to contact them directly.
Yes, sir.
Well, wouldn't that depend on what that would depend on what they have in their accumulated savings.
I assume so.
So, okay.
Any other questions there?
I did have one question on the emergency funding that you were discussing. Does that at the end of the biennium get reverted or does that stay in?
No, sir, that stays in. There's one of those like planning, land acquisition, and the emergency funding stay put for the commission to have at their pleasure. And as I explained earlier on land opportunity, we're only asking to replace the funds that were spent. In the emergency funding, I did an analysis. It went back and took a look at the last time it was accessed and how much we're spending. And there's a balance currently of $4,127,408 in that account. And we haven't had to spend anywhere near that. And so we're not asking for anything. We're just going to let that sit there for emergency use when the commission needs it. And we won't ask to replenish that unless we find that there's a large emergency.
So if that needs replenishment, say you use it and it needs replenishment, is that something you just ask for, or is there a statutory?
Yes, sir. That would be an exception request in the budgetary process that we're going through right now. And we would have to get the commission's approval to request and the amount, and we would do analysis to help guide them in that and then follow their direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other
Continue.
questions? All right, we'll move on to page 31, I believe is where we were at. This is a B11 report for the fiscal year, and statute allows that this state construction department can move between phases in a project. So perhaps there's some money left in design and then they have an overrun in construction. We can B11 the money from one to the other, and then we have to report on that. However, we haven't done any of this year. So this report is also blank.
Yet.
Moving along to page 32. This is per the requirements for the annual report. We are required to report to you all the closed, demolished, and disposed buildings. So this is a listing of all the ones that were from July 1st of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. We keep a large, robust database of all the buildings, and we go through all of these buildings and the status of those with the districts during the facility planning process. So you'll see that there were 3 closed, 11 demolished, and 8 disposed. The question's been asked before, what does disposed mean? And so I'd like to just answer that for you. It could mean that like a modular was sold, or a modular could have been moved from one district to another, or it could have been returned to the company that they're renting it from. There are a number of things that could mean disposed, but just for your knowledge.
The question, obviously, if it's demolished, it's the square footage is taken off the books, but when it's closed, that's still there. Is a closed school eligible for major maintenance monies?
A mothballed school still qualifies for major maintenance, so their square footage stays in their account overall.
That's correct. The mothballed school statute qualifies for a lesser amount of major maintenance, but it still does get some major maintenance. And the idea there is that could stay in mothballed status for a number of years. So the thinking is let's keep it in relatively good shape so that if a district wants to open it up, they can.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, I think I know the answer, but on some of these demolitions, is that a bid process? And I'm hoping that all of that material, I get asked this a lot. What did you do with the bricks? Or, whatever happened to all those windows? Or
Well, we don't have Paul here today to officially answer that question, but they all are official bids. And George can even expound on it, that there's in bid documents in the front ends, there's a lot of recycled content and all that kind of thing that goes into the bid itself. So, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just add when the districts advertise those demolition projects, the contractors that are bidding on them can make an assessment of whether there's anything of value in the building that they could salvage, and they could take that into account when they're putting in their bids. So that's kind of how that organically works itself out.
so, Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up. Mr. Glided, is there quite a bit of material that is usable out of an old school, for example, these days? Or
Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, I would say not reusable, maybe recyclable in a bulk manner. So I don't think there's too many demolition contractors that go out there and try to save the bar joists.
Yeah.
I think they just demo the building and then they recycle that steel.
Yeah, thank you.
You're trying to pull all copper, wires and all copper pipes out and all that, not from a reuse standpoint, but to salvage them, recycle them, melt down, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Okay.
Alrighty. The next report is on page 33. That is for the new school buildings that opened in the previous year. And this year we just had one, which was Cary Junior High School. That completes tab 2. There's no questions. We'll move along to tab 3. This is a graph representing the K through 12 enrollment trends over the past 10 years. And you'll see this only represents brick and mortar. We do not include virtual. So the big elephant on the graph, so to speak, is 2020 with the COVID, and you'll see the huge drop in the student count there for enrollment. We get this information from WDE, and so it's verified through them, and it's based on their October 1st enrollment.
And is it expected to go back up now in this current year?
It varies from districts. When we were going through the facility planning process this year, we asked most districts that question, and it was a mixed bag. Some felt like it was going to go up again. Some said they didn't really expect that. It just is really all over the map, and we won't know until we get those enrollment figures again to take a look at.
Depends how bad COVID hits us, like how many kids quarantine, huh? Okay, continue.
The next page 35 is the exact same data. It's just a little bit longer period of time. Instead of 10 years, we went back to 2004 just to give you a different perspective on that. Moving along to tab 4. This is the condition, capacity, and consolidated schedules. And I'd just like to remind the committee that this is based pre-Senate File 2. So it's when we had the 2 separate lists, so we're not going to have any discussion or, why didn't we include a consolidated list? I just want to make that clear to begin. And then historically, we do an assessment, just for those of you that may be new to the committee. Historically, we do an assessment every 4 years or so, but the last assessment that we had done was in 2016. And that's where they go out and assess all of the buildings and all of them, like storage sheds, everything for condition, as well as the different components that are within the building. And we use a formula to come up then with a score for the building, which is called the facility condition index score, or we often refer to it as the FCI score or condition score. And then the condition index scores are compiled, and we prioritize those, we list them, and the higher the score, the worse the building is. So we have a listing of those. We divide also the list into 2 types based on statute. The commission is supposed to prioritize education buildings over any other buildings. So we have the list divided in 2. So the education buildings are on pages 38 through 42 here, if you wanted to look at that. And we start with the buildings that were listed at the top of the list that were in the worst condition. And we've added a column off to the right that shows the status. So you can see a lot of those buildings have been remedied or there's been some activity on there. And as we move down the list, you'll see things.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just a real quick
Representative
question, just for my own purposes. So on the list, I just was looking at what's on from my district. So Sweetwater one has Lincoln Elementary School on there, and I noticed it on the earlier one, which is, I don't even know if you'd call it mothballed, but does that impact that when they're taken out of service and it's not being used at all?
Yes, if the district chooses not to remedy a building, if as we go through the facility planning process and we're talking about what their needs are, and that one's maybe high on the condition score, I'm just in a theoretical example, it was up there, we would discuss that with them. It's a high condition building. What would you like to do? And they're like, we're going to mothball that, or hey, we have a different plan for that building. We're going to lease it, or whatever their plan is. They can say, we're not interested in a remedy in that right now, and we put that off the table. Does that help? Because the district, it's a collaborative effort too, because we don't know what every district's doing and what their plans are, just like the master plan for Laramie one. We don't get into it at that detail with them. That's their business. And we don't want to get into that local control, but we want to collaborate with them so that they're telling us, we want that off the list right now. Is that helpful?
Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you.
Okay.
But Mr. Chair, we have found out the secret to $32,000 of interest that Senator Landon referred to from one of our staffers. Why don't you go ahead and read that out?
Yes. He took a look at it and he said that they have $1.7 million in certificates of deposit, and that's how their interest is so much higher. And they're getting a deposit rate through those CDs, and a lot of the CDs on 48 to 60 month CDs, which have much higher interest rates. So they did invest better.
So they invested their reserves. Thank you.
Okay. Moving along on pages 43 to 45, those are what we call ancillary buildings. Those are the ones that are non-educational buildings, things like a bus barn or an administration building, and those are prioritized much less. And as the funding and the revenue streams have dried up a little bit or have not been quite as readily available, you'll see the commission has not put forth the ancillary buildings in a while to consider for remedies.
Representative Landon or Brown.
Just out of curiosity on that one, I recognize that we don't put it forward, but we had a fire up in the Riverton area a few years ago, and I never did hear what it was from, but there was speculation at the beginning of when that had happened that it was from deteriorated maintenance. So is that, I recognize that we don't have the funds to do it, but I guess maybe the next time we do a full assessment, we should possibly look at something along those lines, just because we certainly don't want to go down the process of losing an entire building. And granted, we get insurance back on that, but if we can stop a disaster before it happens, it would be kind of nice.
And that would be one of those items that if it were to be brought forward to us, I would recommend that when we get into the budget, we talked about the other budget considerations. Those are something that's a really unique one-off that needs to be addressed, that we really don't have the ability to address, that we would maybe bring forward to the commission and let them look at it. If the district brought that forward to us, I'm not aware of that though. Is that helpful? Yep. Okay, great. We'll move along to page 49. With your permission. So now we're getting into the capacity listing. And I believe the chart on page 49 is the best listing there. Now, remember, we had high, medium, and low capacity schools. Anything that was over 100% that's high capacity, we would take action on. Some of the others that we would look at would be, we'd be monitoring for possible action at a later date. So the reason why the chart is divided into two lists, there's the blue one at the top. That is something that we would consider actionable. Those are ones that would qualify for consideration of doing a Mercer study or doing possibly a remedy, a new school or something along those lines. And then the one below the green one are ones that are, we call them observable. Those are ones that have either already been acted upon in some way or which are not, otherwise not being considered at this time. And then if there are any of the schools that that you're interested in. All of these schools, each one on the list, we go in order. There's a specific analysis for each school in the report on pages 50 through 62. They show that detailed analysis for each school if anyone's interested in those or needs more detail on those. Okay, moving along on pages 63 to 65, that goes through the capacity calculation methodology. And it talks about like the utilization rate of schools. For instance, elementary schools get utilized at 100%, but junior highs and high schools, you have all those passing periods in the hallways there. So there's a little bit less utilization rate there. And then moving along to page 66, alternative schools are also a little bit different because generally speaking, alternative schools have a little bit different mission. There are a lot of times they're catch-up classes to graduate, or their clientele's different, or sometimes they have day classes and night classes. So they're a little bit different. So their calculation is just slightly different as well. And then moving along to page 68, this is the component list. And something else I wanted to bring up. So the component list is, for those of you who may not know, this is a listing of those projects that kind of fall in the gap between what the schools can cover with major maintenance and what a full-blown capital construction project would be. So something akin to like a new roof. For a very small school district, if they had to pay for a new roof, they'd have to save up their major maintenance for a number of years and not do anything else and defer all of their major maintenance. So even though this isn't statutorily required, historically, the legislature has considered these projects. And then to make it a project that make it something that's more collaborative, our process is we have a 12-person committee that is made up of personnel from the school districts of the 4 quadrants in the state. And for each quadrant, we try and get a superintendent, a facility planning manager, and a business manager. And those 12 people get together and they prioritize the list. There's an application process that they go into to begin with. They take all those applications and they prioritize this list. And that's what you're looking at now. Then the commission went through and took a look at the list, and we had recommended around 13 million. That was project number 7, because it looks like historically it's kind of where we've been sitting with the funding that we receive. And they took a look at the list and are worried about some of those projects that are a little bit lower on the list and maintaining those assets. So they wanted to go down through project 11. And they also had some specific language that they wanted included in their recommendation, which I can read to you when we get to the budget, if you'd like, because they had some specific language that they wanted to include with that. Are there any questions on components?
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to once again raise, and we don't necessarily have a clear solution. We certainly haven't in years. The concern that I have with the way this component process works, in that it really isn't particularly equitable as a process, right? When you look at the list, I see 44 ranked projects. No offense to Laramie 1, but roughly half of them, I think, are Laramie 1 projects, maybe at least a third. Natrona's on there only once. And what I'm getting at is not that anyone's doing this wrong. I think all of the projects that are on this list are component projects, so I think it qualifies. But with major maintenance, we basically have a formula where we distribute the funds based on certain circumstances. With component, you kind of have to opt in. And you don't necessarily get the funds right away. You can't assure them. So you have circumstances where you have a project where one district will choose to use major maintenance for that project because it needs to happen soon and they can't await an approval. And then you have other projects where they're balancing major maintenance and they're flowing it and they're thinking through project prioritization and they can work out a component process. You also don't see an awful lot of very small districts here. And I suspect part of that is because there's a process to it. There's a work function. And if you don't have somebody whose job it is to write applications for components, then you don't have as many applications for components. If you do, life's a little easier and you can get that done. So I've hated that for years, but we have a new director. And so I wanted to point out how much I hate that and how it really doesn't work very, very well. And I don't think it accomplishes the appropriate equity that we're trying to accomplish there. So I wanted to raise that concern. And I don't know if there are any specific thoughts based on the list that we have before us that'll be considered by the commission. for that inequity. But again, there are 48 school districts. There are only 44 projects here. So simple math tells me that not everyone's got one. And I can see that there's serious disproportion among the school districts. And that's true every year. There are certain districts that I know do this well. They're always on the list. Other districts don't do this well. They're never on the list.
So,
Mr. Chair, I can say one thing that, I do wish we had Paul here, but I've heard Paul discuss this before and he's discussed it with me. So I can look into it, and if the committee wishes, come back with some more detail. But the way it's been explained to me so far is that these are the peers of the school districts. They literally volunteered to move their projects down and other ones up, and that it's need driven. These are folks who are maintenance and facilities people who look at, just like we were talking about, maybe poor wiring, as Representative Brown brought up and things of that nature. So they have gone in, they have even requested information back from districts instead of plans or follow-up information to find out if this is a need to have or a nice to have. And that's how they've dropped that all down there. In any given year, some district might skew it their way or not, but I'm told it's equitable in how we're doing it, and it's objective, and they even vote their own projects down. But I can also get another layer below that and find out some more if the committee would like me to do that.
so just so, excuse me a moment. So tell me how it's prioritized. How does the ranking happen, and who does the ranking?
Yeah, so each of the people have a scoring mechanism, and if you like, we can bring this back and I can have Paul show. I've seen it, but I don't have it right now to speak to it, so I don't. But there's a ranking mechanism and how they look at the condition and the overall need, and then I believe there was a component if something was even. If you know some more, if it's you can't buy these parts anymore, they don't make this, all that kind of thing goes into it and make a decision.
There's also a consideration, sorry,
I know. That's
Director
good.
Vincent, there's also a consideration if you had a project on the list last year, or you've had it on the list for a year or two, and it bumps you up on that list because you've been waiting longer for it. And they also take a look at how much major maintenance they have available and how much major maintenance how much skin they can have in the game, how much can they contribute to the project as well, is part of the application process that they look at.
Yes, and I've also heard Paul explain that it's fluid, that something could have been down here last year, but now this year, the roof is in a worse condition than it was last year, and it's moving back up again. So do you have something else you want to add to that, George?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You know, the foundation of the component process years ago was that the department project managers brought this information forward to the commission. And there wasn't much satisfaction with that because districts thought that some project managers were doing a better job of representing their districts than others. So I think it was in 2011 or 12, we started to introduce the process of having a committee made up of school district peers, facility managers, superintendents, et cetera, to do the analysis. And the idea was, the focus was supposed to be to recognize districts that need help with major maintenance. It wasn't to create another major maintenance formula like we have for major maintenance, which is an equitable formula-driven process. This was to try to recognize districts that needed extra help, primarily because some districts were stuck with more than their allowable square footage through no fault of their own. So we recognized that we had districts that might have had a high enrollment years ago, especially in some of these smaller towns. The enrollment dropped off for whatever reason, but they were still stuck with this huge facility to maintain. And the idea was supposed to be to try to recognize where those problems were, where those, misaligned square footages were, and to try to, direct some money towards the maintenance of those projects. There's about 20% of the square footage, educational square footage in the state that's over the allowable. And for districts that are stuck with some of that, that's a huge drain on their major maintenance efforts. It takes dollars away from the schools that really need it. And that's what this was supposed to do. The method of getting there was to form the committee that Laura talked about, and that's worked really well because they're basically making their own assessments. They all get together, they spend quite a bit of time, gathering the information from all the districts that are applying for this help. So I think it's a good process, given that it's an addition to the major maintenance process that you have by formula. So it's a supplement to try to help districts that are really in trouble. Now, over the years, I think we've lost some of that focus a little bit. And I think we need to kind of get back to that, because that's why I think you see some districts that are on there many times and others that aren't. Maybe they don't have the staff to pursue it, but I think the process should be such that it can be brought out. Because if districts are suffering with, trying to spread their major maintenance across facilities that are larger than what they need, it just degrades the facilities.
Do the committee members rotate on and off this committee so that all districts have the ability to?
It's done on a volunteer basis. We ask for volunteers for that, and we fill up the slots from the different regions.
Okay,
Mhm.
good. Somebody had a question over here. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And honestly, it's not the ranking of priority that is the concern. I think that's probably a pretty good process where they get together and they work to figure out which to prioritize. I think it's more the what's on the list and what's not on the list as a process that is the concern that I have. And when we've talked about this in the past, it tends towards more of what George said about the circumstance where there's no way a district could afford a new roof. 100 years of major maintenance isn't going to get their problem solved, or an unanticipated boiler that blew up and we need to get some funds to it quickly. Well, ironically for that, this doesn't work because it's a relatively long process. So my boiler's breaking doesn't work. If the roof really is failing, this doesn't work.
Well,
So
if your boiler blew up, you would have the emergency funds.
no, that's what I'm saying. This doesn't address what it was set out
Not
to
for
originally address. And it's sort of changed in its evolution, Mr. Chairman. And honestly, a lot of what's on here probably is major maintenance. Although if we're not doing an appropriate job of calculating major maintenance funding because of the excess square footage, to me, that sounds like let's fix that instead of create an alternative distribution mechanism that some districts are capable of benefiting from because they're able to and they know how to work it, and others don't participate in. If this were uniform, there'd be a uniform distribution among the districts.
One thing you said, what things are on the list or not on the list. They're not on the list because they haven't made the request, correct? So everybody who's made a request gets on the list.
Right.
Ranking may be wrong, but so it's up to the districts to actually request this.
Right, Mr. Chairman, correct. And therein lies the inequity. Not all districts are created equal in their capacity to make requests.
Mr. Chairman.
We have some big districts that I don't think have a problem doing the paperwork.
Representative Brown.
Two questions, if I can. First one is a direct segue question from what Senator Rothfuss is asking. How long is that application? How onerous is it? Is it something that takes a couple man hours per request? Is it something that's fairly simple to put forward? What are we talking about there? That's the first question.
I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out.
George.
Mr. Chairman, I could kind of take a shot at it.
Sure,
It's up
go
to the
ahead.
district to put forth whatever information they want to. So if they want to spend hours taking photographs of the condition of their roof and writing up a summary and having an engineer analyze it and submitting that to the committee, they can do that. Or a small district could just say, my roof's in really bad shape, write a letter and boom, you're done. So it's really up to the district to submit whatever information they think will make the best case for themselves. And I know there's a couple of districts still here, and maybe they could address your question more
So it
specifically.
sounds like the application is not onerous.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, that's actually perfect segue to my number two question. When I look at a lot of these, I agree with a big portion of these being onerous and well outside of a major maintenance schedule, and for the smaller school districts. And then I do see some in my own school district that I look at and I go, we're going to fund up to number 11. Well, 3 spots away, we've got some for $29,000. I hate to say it, but I feel like that one, how in the world did we not fit that in and find a way to figure that out in major maintenance? Maybe it's because, as Senator Rothfuss has been saying earlier, we're not funding enough for major maintenance based on square footage. That may be the case, but you know, when I see that, the disparity, and this is where I think he's trying to get to, the disparity between Laramie County one asking for $29,000 for school door replacements compared to a roof replacement in Gillette or in Matisse or whatever the case may be. Two totally different topics. And maybe we ought to think about tightening up what as George alluded to, maybe we've gotten away from the intent of what a component level project is supposed to be. Because I'm sitting here looking at this and there's a few of those. We got one for 29,000, we got one for 57,000, got one for 38,000. But the majority of these are very large funding that in my books do level down with that, what I would consider a component. So maybe that's something we need to discuss deeper as a committee, but certainly I feel like there is a disparity and I agree with the senator on this.
And Mr. Chair, thank you, Representative Brown. We'll start with that in-house. I'm hearing you and then Senator Rothfuss, first of all, kind of loud and clear. Put some eyes on this as the new director, put some eyes on this and take a look at, we have questions. So we'll begin that process right away.
Senator Lang.
I am told that if you, aside from who has the staff to fill out the request, I'm told that everyone who fills it out, it lands here. And what this team does is they prioritize it based on their subject matter expertise. That's what I'm told that they do. So they prioritize it once it lands. So yes.
Okay. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just a comment to kind of close that discussion. I appreciated Mr. Galida because we've had situations in the past, Director, where Saratoga, for example, had an HVAC system that we had to get torn out and redone. And there's just simply no way that school district could ever put away the funding to do it. So the spirit of this component system, I think, is a good one. It's just that maybe it's wandered off onto the dirt road a little bit. So I think it's a good idea to just take a look at it, make sure that we've got the right things on it.
One last note as well is that the component projects are only done during the biennium. It's only once every 2 years. When we do, they line up with a biennial budget request, so we can include them like in this packet and with the budget request. We don't do them during a supplemental year. So it only does once every 2 years. I don't know if that helps you or not, but just for your edification.
Yes, Representative Brown.
Just to make sure I understand, you're talking funding to 11 would happen this one time, but it would be for the biennial budget. Is that right?
Correct. I mean, so we're asking right now for the 23-24 biennium, but then the next time we would ask would be for the 25-26 biennium. We only ask once every 2 years for these. We don't do anything in the interim year. So some of these projects, if it was left on the list, that means it's been sitting for 2 years and then it would be back on the list again. That was kind of my point, if that helps.
I just want to make sure I understood that.
So if it comes back in 2 years, do they get re-ranked?
They do get re-ranked and they get credit on the application process for having waited. It bumps them up a little bit on the waiting list since they've been waiting for a while.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any other questions on this hot topic? Okay, continue.
Sorry about the mic. We'll move along to tab 5 on page 69. And this is a section where we talk about our project cost budgeting. And really for us, all of the project cost budgeting starts at the facility plan level. When we sit with the districts and we talk about their facility plans and what their needs are and what their interests are, and they identify something that they feel is going to be a need that they would like to have a budget request for, when we get done with that process, we start building budgets for those items. We generally get together with the district. It is a collaborative process. The project manager and usually myself and the district personnel get together to fill out the form to figure out what their needs are going to be. And so the first step in doing that is calculating the allowable square footage. How big is the school going to be? How many students is it going to fit? And then we establish the projected direct construction cost per square foot budget. We have a database of all the projects that we've done historically and the type of buildings, what region it's in. For instance, there's a factor that takes into consideration which region you're building in, because building in Teton County is not the same as building in Laramie County. They're two different, they're two different regions. And so we have something that kind of balances that out and gives us a cost per square foot. And building a high school is much more expensive than building an elementary school. So there's a lot of factors that we go into putting that into the budget. And then the step 3 is calculating the land, planning, design, and construction costs. So if the land is necessary, or there's some sort of additional planning, a lot of the construction costs, for instance, like architectural and engineering fees or owner's overhead, is done as a percentage of the construction costs. But then there's other construction costs that are not. They're done as standalones, like on-site infrastructure that may be needed, or some sort of like a water treatment plant or something like that. That's done as a basically a block number instead of as a percentage of the construction costs.
That include FF&E as well?
Yes, there is a calculation in there for FF&E, or we believe we call it FC&E.
Oh.
Our project manager, Paul, has been very specific with me that I'm calling it the wrong thing. It's supposed to be FC&E, so I'm trying to correct myself. So when we do that, obviously, project budgeting is by no means an exact science. We do the best we can to be collaborative with the districts and make sure that they're comfortable with the number as well as us before we bring it before the commission and you all. And we want to make sure, because we have one shot at getting the number, the last thing we want to do is give you a number that's a lowball number and have to come back, because that's not good for anybody. That messes up all the budgeting that you're trying to do and all the revenues that you're trying to figure out. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
I know I'm not asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So you kind of forgot who I was. That's no problem.
I
no problem.
apologize. We're not looking down that end of the table.
As I listen to you, ma'am, you're saying that the project cost budgeting, I'm assuming you go to every school district.
No, we don't go to every school district. When we do the facility planning process, we meet with all the school districts. It's been virtually, or sometimes we have them come into our district. If you can imagine, within it's a 3 or 4 month period, we're meeting with 48 school districts, 3 charter schools, plus all the state agencies. We really can't travel to all of them, but we do try and travel out to the districts, and the project managers certainly travel to their districts.
The full question, Mr. Chairman, was, if you're going to these school districts, you're getting out and like you said, virtually, Zoom, whatever way, phone calls, you would assume, or it would stand to reason, that the component request prioritization list is mentioned at that time. So if the conversation before was some school districts can't afford to have people fill out that list, but wouldn't you think that if there's some kind of priority that they do have at this level, that they would kind of know that they could fill out this application to get on that list? Does that make sense to you?
I think I'm getting confused a little bit, but if I might, Mr. Chairman, ask some clarifying
Go ahead.
questions.
Mhm.
Thank you. Senator Hutchins, so the projects that we're talking about here would be like a new elementary school that was driven by capacity. The component application is a completely different application,
Right.
and that's done. So they're 2 different ones, but are you suggesting that if we're talking to them about this, we should be talking to them about the component list? Is that what I'm understanding?
That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, if you're there, it's like, hey, do you know you could use the component list for such and such a need? So
Yeah.
it kind of negates the fact or the saying that some school districts don't know about or have the opportunity to apply. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, no, there is, during the facility planning process, all school districts are made aware of the component process.
Gotcha.
They all know about the process if that's where you're headed.
That's where
I
I'm
don't
headed.
believe that any district would tell you they're unaware that the component project exists
Thank
or that
you.
process exists. I don't think you'll find that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That being said, we'll move along.
Yeah.
We'll move along to page 72. 72 is basically the process of how do we get an appropriation, but it's at about a 30,000 foot view. And so we start out with the facility planning, as I talked about, and then doing the component requests. We bring all that to the commission, the capacity, the facility condition index, and the component list, and we talk with the commission, and they put together a budget request. We develop this annual report that we're covering with you right now, and the commission approves that, makes any changes that they want to the annual report, and we make sure they understand it and they approve it. And then we're at where we are right here. We're on number 6, which is we're reviewing that with the select committee. And then it goes through the governor, and the budget considerations go to the JC, and it goes down through the legislative process. And this is just a 30,000 foot view. And then if you roll down into pages 73 and 74, this is something that we put together 2 years ago when I came to the department. This is a timeline that really answers the question for districts. I have a need. How soon can I see money? Because it's really what they're interested in, is how soon can I get a fix for this? And so we wanted to make sure that they could understand all of the different things that happen with public funds and all the different entities that are involved in the process, and making sure in the checks and balances, making sure that it's being spent appropriately and that all the considerations are taken into account. So you'll see we have all the entities from our department and the school districts, the School Facilities Commission, you all, the Joint Appropriations Committee, the governor's office. There's the governor himself and the legislature at large. We wanted to give them not only who's involved in that process, but a general timeline. This isn't perfect because every year the dates change, but this gives them a general idea. And we've had a lot of school districts that actually have told us they like this. They use it to educate school board members to understand the process, or new members as they bring in staff members, that they can understand then how that process works. We're always available to answer questions, but we had it enough times that we thought we should really put together a visual for them. So that's what this document is designed for. Anyone have questions on that process? Most of you have been through that process quite a bit, so probably not.
Good.
And then we'll move along to page 75. This is just a copy of a sample budget worksheet. So you know, when we talk about we're sitting down and developing a budget with the school districts, this is the form that we're filling out with the districts. Taking into consideration all the different phases of the project and the number of students that it's designed for, and what that allowable square footage looks like, the region, when the bid date might be completed, or when the construction's scheduled to be bid, so that we can figure out an inflation factor for that. There's a lot of things that go on in the background of this sheet, but this gives you a general idea of something that's filled out in this project. All the numbers in here are just made up, so they're not actually realistic maybe. And then moving along to page 77, this is a graph of the new construction project bids and the average cost per square foot. In here, you'll see that all the X's are individual projects, and this goes clear back to 2001. And then the red dots you'll see is kind of an annual average of those dots. So you can see, you know, earlier in the like 11, 12 range, there were so many projects being bid. It looks like one big black blob on the sheet instead of individual X's, because there were so many projects and so much money flowing through. And then as we've gone through time, obviously, we're not doing nearly as many projects as we used to.
Well, there has not been a bid since last year.
We had 3 in 2020. I believe at the time I did this graph, there was one more, I believe Slade came on that we had that isn't included in this graph because we missed that in the time frame.
Because I mean, the curve looks like it's going downhill, but it's not.
It is not, and that's why when we discussed during the budget and the Coyote Ridge project, it's the first new school, you know, ground up that's going to happen. It's going to bid during COVID pricing, so we have nothing to fall back on, which is why we're trying to do our best guess and set aside so we can hold the bid. Slade was done just prior to the COVID pricing. It was done on the front end of COVID, but COVID pricing had not taken effect. So we're, you know, Coyote Ridge with Laramie 1 is our first pilot project on what the bid climate's going to look like this fall when we bid it.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Oh, George.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to take a minute. You'll appreciate this, I think, being an architect. The X's on this graph show the actual bids that were submitted. The red dots are the accepted bid. So when you look at this on a project basis, you can see how much variation there is from bids from contractors. I mean, it's easily in some places 10, 15, 20% range. So when it comes to estimating the cost of projects, like we're trying to do now with Coyote Ridge, this kind of demonstrates just what an arduous task that is when the contractor's own numbers can range so much. I just wanted to point that out, and I thought you being an architect should certainly appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've seen that. And it's not getting any better. Okay.
All right, the next
Let's
section
continue.
is tab 6, but that's the budget. So we're going to have used that corrected insert that we gave you that looks like this. We're going to move to that. So on the first page, as you flip it over on page 79, that's just an priority listing by category, which is the same thing that we just went through in the executive summary at the beginning of this report. So moving along to page 80, this is a listing of our operations budget and it goes by category. If you look at the second column from the left where it says project narrative, you'll see object. And we talked about the 100 series all being salaries and benefits for the employees. If you look at that object and it says 01, anything that starts with a 01 is 100 series. So all of those are our salary and benefits for employees. If you go then down partway, about halfway through the page, you'll see objects that start with 02. That starts the 200 series. 200 series are all support costs. There's gonna be things like your travel or us going to legislative meetings, continuing education, if we had anything like that, office supplies, all of those supporting costs are listed in your 200 series. And then if you flip the page to page 81 at the very bottom, you'll see object 0301, which is cost allocation. That is basically us paying, that's our attorney's fees that we pay to the AG's office. And then the 0400 series is telecom and communications, and that's IT and telecom, sorry, is all basically ETS-oriented stuff, the services that we pay for ETS for. The 500 series is space rental. We do have an office space that we rent over in Evanston that our project manager operates out of Evanston for that side of the state. And then the 900 series are all professional fees. There's no questions. I'm not seeing any questioning faces, so I'll move along.
Yep.
On page 83, we move into the engineering and technical. This is a category where we do consultants. If there is anything that we need, like you would ask us for information from some sort of a consultant, like an engineering firm or something like that, we would pay for it out of here. There used to be money for the assessments that was built into this budget. However, during time, there's a story behind that, but over time, that money has disappeared out of the standard budget and we no longer carry that, knowing that when that was reduced, we would have to come to you when we ask for an assessment, which segues nicely into the $4 million that was added into the special budget by the commission, because they are added that specifically for an assessment. They are asking to do an assessment. And part of that request from the commission comes from the roadshow and listening to the school districts that are looking at all of our lists that we're doing, our condition lists and things that we just looked at. And they're saying that information is outdated. It's at least 5 years old. Our condition has changed. I know that we're maybe 12th on the list, but our conditions, just like you were saying earlier, has deteriorated. We feel like we're going to be higher on the list and they want a condition assessment done. So the commission listened to that and are asking for $4 million as an exception request to conduct a condition assessment.
So this is where we're taking the cost estimating out of as well, if you have to have cost estimating.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
If you ask for cost estimating that the department's going to pay for, it would come out of here, engineering and technical.
No, he's not the independent cost estimate we're having done for
Oh.
County Ridge.
No, that's actually in our 900 series out of our operating
Oh,
budget.
okay.
That is our operating budget for the department. We're
It
taking it
just
out.
said consulting services, so
Yes.
Correct.
I assumed wrong. Sorry. Okay. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the money was cut for the assessments across the state, was the budget, or no, I'm sorry, was the statute changed? Or was this a situation in which the amazing opportunity for us to tell the executive branch to do more with less was the case in which that occurred? So did you guys, was the statute changed and was the expectation still set that you guys continue to do assessments not less than once every 4 years, but the money was not available for that?
I can't answer that. To my knowledge, the statute has not been changed. I didn't work at this agency at that time, but I did work in the budget office, so I do know the story behind this because this was one of my agencies. I can share that with you. They were looking to reduce standard budgets, and they were trying to figure out different methodologies for doing that. And so what was done in the past was there was basically, and I'm just going to use round figures. So let's say a cost estimate was $4 million. We'll just use that figure. They cut that in half, and they would have $2 million in one biennium, $2 million in the next. After those 2 years, we had 4 years, we had $4 million, we do the assessment. Then our standard budget would kick in, and we get for the next biennium, we'd have 2 million, and then we'd 2 million, and we'd build it up. So they looked at that, and they were looking at cost saving measures, and they thought, why should we have the money sitting in the agency, having that money built up when we could be utilizing it somewhere else? So they wanted to reduce the standard and utilize the fund somewhere else, which was fine. But we said, just understand that if you take it out, we can't do the assessment. We will have to come ask for the money to do an assessment. And everyone said, that's great. Come ask us for the money at the time. And, you know, revenue situations change. And so maybe that's not been such a popular request lately.
Follow up on that. Is this the first time that you guys are actually requesting the funds?
Correct.
Okay.
Since those cuts occurred, this is the first time we've actually requested the funds. There was a bill that ran, I believe, last year that we did not request, but came forth from legislation, and that did not pass. And so there's no way for us to do the money. Or to do the assessment without money. I don't have it anywhere. I can't produce that money.
Thank you. And I appreciate this story because I actually very vividly remember the 2 million and 2 million. So I remember having that discussion. So thank you for the background. That light bulb went on.
I believe my battery's dying. Our request, though, is not to put it into the standard budget. Our request is just one time, because we just want to take care of this assessment one time. If you were to choose to add it back to our standard budget, that's a policy decision that's not ours, and we recognize that.
Okay, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a little more clarity on this issue. This was delayed a couple years ago because we were going to combine it with another study at the time. Early in the year, that year, June or September meeting, they came forward with the request for the funding. This committee asked them to put it on ice so that we could do 2 studies at once the following year. So it never came out in the budget, you might say. And then last year during the session, we did attempt to put the funding in for the assessment in one of the select committee bills as it went through the process. And when we got it to the floor, we decided to take that funding out in the event that we would ask for it during this budget session. So it has been discussed. It has been known to this committee or previous members of this committee that it would need to be funded when the time came due. And quite frankly, I think they did a great job of describing we are out of compliance where the studies are out of date, and it's certainly time to go out and redo these assessments or update these assessments.
Thank you. No.
Any other questions on that one? Okay, with that, we'll move along to page 84. This is the major maintenance request. As we discussed earlier, there is $153 million, standard budget, and the request is for $5,665,715 per our calculations. So that would be the request. So the total combined would be the $158 million. Any requests on major maintenance? Moving along. Excuse me, we'll move along to page 85. This is for the charter school leases. We are statutorily required to ask for the money for the charter schools, and there's a formula that drives all of that. So for the Montessori school, which is over in Laramie in Albany County, the request for the biennium is $374,070. For the Poder Academy in Cheyenne and Laramie County, it is $703,940. And for PASS, which is the Poder Academy Secondary School, it is $788,754 for a total charter school request of $1,866,764. Any questions?
Continue.
Okay. The next item is for modulars. There's also a statute that requires us to provide temporary space when necessary. There are 5 modulars on the list. The first 2 are $28,750 and the bottom 3 are $17,375. The difference there is size. All of these are in Laramie 1. We worked with them to look at their schedule of the modulars and that they're still necessary. And we're asking for those funds to be continued. It is $109,625.
Thank you.
All right, moving along. The next one is capacity. This is a request as a supplemental budget for the Coyote Ridge Elementary School in Cheyenne. Due to the pandemic-driven cost increases, when the commission looked at this, they found there were unprecedented conditions, as I believe we're all aware of at this point, in the supply chain and COVID-19. So that they've increased so much that the project could not be completed on time within the original budget. The commission further recommended that the legislature make any such appropriation contingent upon first exhausting the original appropriation, and that the original scope and current design of the project be retained. And I believe Director Vincent would like to speak on this one.
Director.
Thank you. So Coyote Ridge Elementary School for Laramie 1 was given the go-ahead this summer to proceed to 95% plans. Looking at and already hearing about hyperinflation, I asked if they could come in for my first time to put eyes on the project. And they said, well, we typically come to you when we're 95%, we're not at 95. And I said, well, let's just call this my 88.7% plan review update, because I want to find out where you're at. Because if there's an issue and we need to start time to tease it out, second cost estimate, what have you, I'm pretty sure from what Laura's explained to me, we're going to run out of time to get to the commission, to have money set aside, to get to the select, to have it set aside. And indeed, 95% was a few weeks ago, and they'll be bringing us 100% drawings in the next few weeks. So if we had waited for the final number, we would have been late to the show here. It turns out since that 88% and again 95, and that the estimate hasn't changed, it's hovering in the $28 million mark. So the construction apportionment is $23,649,000, but that includes contingencies and fees and other things. The bid number, which is our concern, can we go to bid on bid day, is just over $21 million. So when you take 21 and 28, you have about a $7 million ask. We looked at that, and then the next step, as they were refining, seemed to refine the cost estimate to bring it down. We met with the governor's office and said there is $1.8 million still left over in design. We could be 11 that over, and if you so chose, and there's 1.5 million in anticipated, and we didn't want to sweep all that for one district because there's 5 in line for any part of that money. So the request from governor's office was he'd move 500,000 over of that 1.5 million. So we'd have about 2.3 million of this 7 million delta. We asked for 6 because there's around 1 million of this, so that's 7 figure that the district is finalizing agreements with the landowner next door and the city. If those finalize, then it would be, the number would be at 6, and then 2.3 would come off of that from the B11s. If those agreements went awry for some reason, then it's the 7 million. So the number you're looking at is a 6 million ask. And just speaking with Mr. Bartlett today, it looks like both of those agreements are going to land, so that $1 million will not be added to this. But overall, the ask is still for $6 million not to be added to the project, to be set aside somewhere, you know, that if we don't need it, we don't use it, we don't move it over. That way it's not there. That increases a artificial bid number on bid day, because the contractors even listen to these meetings right now. And then also, so we all feel sure that we're not suddenly adding more scope to that project or enhancement. So it's a number that is held in abeyance so that we can be square at the 28 million on bid day, so we can hold a bid opening. And that's the purpose of it right now. District would like to go to bid this fall if this number is approved, but if it takes until next end of ledge to be funded, then we will start working with them on maybe a 2-phase project where they go out for site work first, buildings later, in order to keep this online for an August 2023 opening, as they are near capacity right now, and that triad, and this is already some 200 some days late before I was hired on getting this place right now. And stand for questions.
Me, Representative Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Because it's COVID related, can we utilize or ask for ARPA funds to reimburse that amount?
So at the district level, Mr. Bartlett has brought that up and pursued it. So there's that with the two B11s, with the 6 million asked through the commission to the committee. We are looking at all uses and all sources. So absolutely.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to publicly thank Mr. Bartlett and Laramie County School District number 1. There's been a lot of work done for that $1 million. A lot of discussions with the city and adjacent landowners, and it's not something that I take lightly sitting on this committee. That was a lot of savings for $1 million for the state. And so I just want to publicly thank Laramie County School District number 1 and Dave especially for that. So thank you.
That one of my first questions, Mr. Chair and Representative Brown, when we first met Laramie, one having these conversations, I said, so I've done 600-700 projects, worked with a lot of cities. Like, you have a city who was willing to just bring on over full traffic signalization, everything for $400,000 to $500,000, and they're willing to do it as part of the project. And it's like, well, they're not willing, but yes. So it was nice to see as someone else gets their feet put to the fire other than SCD by Laramie one.
Representative, excuse me, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Matt, Mr. Chairman. So Director, can you give us some idea, if we're going to set aside $6 million, we're going to be asked what exactly do you have in mind of where this is going to go potentially? Is there any big items that you can point to that you expect will drive that budget? Is it just every single 2x4 and every single faucet, every toilet stool? What are we looking at? Can you give us an idea?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Landon. So you're reading my sheet, my notes right now. I didn't know you could see from there. So the next step, part of the request from the governor's office is, where's your comfort level with the 28 million? And I said, gosh, on bid day, I'm uncomfortable. And then we're supposed to project out to halfway through construction on escalation. And maybe if there is a COVID hyperinflation, already went down during that time. We're tracking materials and volatility. And, just over 2 months of working with Laramie One, wood and metals were just out of sight in the Denver market, but they're out of sight in residential, not necessarily commercial like what we do here. And then each rebounded, and then one of them's going back again. So it's just that volatile. What we agreed on with the governor's office, and we shared it with Laramie One, is we're going to have a second cost estimate done. We will fund that out of this engineering money here. Independent analysis, nothing against the architect, but when you're this kind of number, you could be right or wrong on. It's no different than your physician and getting a second opinion. So we contracted today with another firm. All the drawings have been coming from us and drop shipped to them in a Dropbox, and they should begin on Monday, and it'll take 3 weeks to have the number. We don't know what that number means. It might be exactly around the 28 million right now. It might be 30, it might be 26, but if we don't do it, we won't know, right? So we're getting a second opinion on it.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. And so just one more.
what's,
In the cost estimate, cost the work, I said, and then cost what you believe are the key items, because exactly your question was, I'm sorry, cost of the work and the drawings, and then cost items that you think are absolutely being predicated by COVID money right now, and what that is, if that's roofing, if that's mechanical, whatever. So they're doing a 2-part estimate, what's in the job, and then what's because of the impact right now. So thank you. I forgot that part.
Thanks.
so depending on how the new estimate comes out, whether it's low or it comes in the same, then we're at the 6 million. If it comes in higher, how does the scenario play out for us, as depending on how it turns out? I mean, are you going to increase that number down the line if it comes up 30 million? What's the?
Sure. So in my mind, we need to make bid day whole when we go out on the market and we bid, and the school district feels the same way. You can't have contractors bidding on something, you know, you're $2, $3, $4, $6 million under right now, where its funding comes from. So if this estimate is at the 28 million, which would be the 6 million and then 2.3 of B11, if there's 28 million or less, we have a number to go to bid. It doesn't mean on bid day it won't be 30 million, but we have a number to make whole and go to bid. And that's the point of the exercise.
What I'm saying is if your estimate comes in at 30 million.
Yeah, well, then we're gonna be 2 million short. Making this 6 million, if you set 6 million aside, and then we did not subtract from that 6 million, the 2.3 million that the governor is ready to be 11 over, then we have 8.3 million to hedge against on bid day.
Okay.
So that's the backup plan. That's plan B.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's continue.
So moving along, we'll be on page 88. This is the component list. This is the same one that we showed you during the annual report. This is only showing the ones that the commission actually approved in putting in. So that goes down to the $20 million mark. And the commission also asked that we put in a recommendation of language to share with you all. And so their request is that the commission approved a request for components in the amount of $20,826,451, with the caveat that this is not a guarantee of funding for any particular project on this list, and that all districts on the component list should continue to apply for all possible sources of funding for their projects, including but not limited to federal relief funding. The commission recommends that the legislature make any such appropriation contingent upon it first exhausting federal relief funding options.
We were specifically asked to read that in. The commission worked hard on those words to put those together. And Mr. Chair, to Representative Brown's comment earlier, one of the concerns that we have is we have seen some inflated pricing on the component and the major maintenance projects that have gone out from a COVID standpoint. So when we were talking about, we all were fairly dismayed in the commission meeting of, gosh, I mean, 11 projects out of all this, they'll come in here on the list. And I said, I hate to say this, but you knowing where the bid market might be, we might get 4 projects done and not even 7. You know, we don't know. And I think that was part of the conversation. And as we said, in general, the commission's aligned with the committee on this is the body of work that we need to be doing and keep going. So just a mere thought that it might be maybe 4 instead of 7 that might actually get funded, as I think was helped extend this down to the project number 11, which came up at the $20 million.
So if we don't have enough money to fund all 11, is it first come, first serve? Whoever gets their project out first?
So my understanding is we fund straight down that list since it's in a prioritized manner.
Well,
And then we
what if-
ask you to let us go down and pick off smaller ones if there's any excess money in order to make sure we leave nothing on the table is what we ask of you, is
So
my understanding.
If project number 2 happens to be out there, and does project number 3 have to wait for project number 2? Are all these projects ready to go, shovel ready?
Mr. Chairman, if I might. So in the past, what the legislature has wisely done is written some language when they make this appropriation, allowing us to move down the list as appropriate. And then if there's any savings from project, if a project was budgeted, like, let's say $2 million and came in at 1.8 million, we take that and roll that down, and we keep rolling down the list to complete as many projects as we possibly can. And what we do with the appropriation, when you give us, let's say you give us $6 million and we have projects for 2, 2, and 2 on the list, we would go $2 million, $2 million, and 2. We would split it out that way for what they're budgeted and let those projects go. Now, if you gave us, let's say, we had projects that were even more than that, we would hold on those projects based on the amount of money that you give us. We'd fund the projects for the money that you gave us. And then if more money became available from savings from those projects, we would roll down the list in priority order. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I'm not concerned with if we have more money. I'm concerned.
Well, I
with
agree.
I know what your
So-
question is.
Yes.
If we have $20 million we put in here, but since construction may be going sky high, we can only fund half of that, say $10 million. So on the list, you've got a priority list.
I know what you want.
So is the
Yeah.
first one funded, second one funded, third one, but if it's not ready, does the project later have to wait in line?
Right. So my understanding is these are shovel ready, as we covered later, if they were the ones that didn't make it from the year before. And we don't do the equivalent of 11 notice to proceeds and then find out that they're all over bid and say, oops. But we also don't drag them out sequentially and not do the second, third, fourth until the first one's totally done and all change orders are in. So, Paul from our office controls that with the districts and how he rolls out those bids and how they take place.
And I would also add that I believe it was 2 years ago when I first started here that we got, I believe there was $10 million. You came up with a dollar amount and said you get $10 million, do as many projects as you can. What we did is went through the first like 4 or 5 and worked on those
Right.
projects. And then we had a partial amount and we went to the district with the partial amount and said, we could give you what we've got, or you can wait
Mhm.
until we see if there's savings from the other to fund you wholly. And they said, we'd really like to get going with the project. It was like 3/4 of it. They said, we think we can find the differential. We'll take that now and we'll get the project done with the differential. We'll pay for the differential. So we gave them a choice on how they wanted to proceed.
Okay. Representative.
Thank you,
Walters.
Mr. Chairman. Additionally, in this approach to allowing these component level projects to be worked on, we've given the latitude to the agency also to look for opportunities to save money, such as if they're doing 2 HVAC systems in one district and both of those are in the first handful of projects, go out and bid those as a collective project to try and get an economies of scale savings, you might say, to get, so we requested that of the agency as well, to try and look for ways that make sense. So maybe it's project 9 and they're only going through 7, but project 9 and project 6 could tie together and save money overall. We've said those are the kind of things we want you to look at as you look at this list. So yes, it's prioritized, but within reason, use good judgment to save money as well.
Right. Thank you. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just shooting from the hip here, so bear with me, but if we've got that 5th project, let's say that we say, hey, we got 75%, and they say, oh, we feel like we can come up with a 25%. How many other projects do we think that we might be able to get away with something like that? I'm being serious. I mean, and it's not, I'm not trying to sit there and put an onus back onto the school district, but we're funding the top 4 and we're just giving them all the money. But this 5th one's going, hey, look, I'm willing to come up with some money, and we're not even asking the first 4 for that. So I guess maybe something for the committee's consideration is what do we look at when we think about something like that, that we have a school district that's willing to come up and out of pocket with 25% cost share. And I recognize the onus is on us as a state agency, well, us as the collective body up here, and then on you guys, but I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
If I remember the project correctly, and I apologize, I don't have, my memory's a little hazy on that, but if I remember what had happened is the project was becoming paramount for the district, and they were going to, if they didn't know they were going to get, they were planning on not getting any of the component money flowing down to them at all. And so they were planning to do the project anyway, because they had to get it done. It was one of those projects that it was paramount for them and they felt like they had to get it done. So when we came back and said, we think we can cover this, they were elated because they were planning on doing, I believe, the whole project. Since they went, great, they were trying to scrape together the funds to do it themselves. Does that help a little bit? A little, but I do, to your point, I understand, like, if you went to every project and said, well, hey, we can pay 75%, can you come up with the other quarters? You got skin in the game. I understand what you're saying, but that's not the way that's traditionally has been allocated. So I don't know that I can answer your question about how could we institute that and change the game up on those schools. I'm not sure how that would go or how we would implement that.
Right. But Mr. Chair, Representative Brown, it's a question I've had since I got here, because if someone has depreciated reserves, if someone has money for enhancement, I was going to go after someone else, and they can keep matching and someone else can't, the rich keep getting richer and projects roll and things get done, except for the someone who can't at all. So I've had it on my radar. It's like, when are you going to get to this and value engineering and enhancements but it's out there. And it's a concern to me and how that rolls out equitably.
Slippery slope we don't want to go down. Thank you. Continue.
Moving along to page 90. This is a request for $300,000 for planning funds for the commission. Planning of funds allow them to do things like Mercer studies. If there's, when we looked at the capacity list, if there's a school that's maybe on that, in that little bit lower category, we're kind of keeping an eye on them. We think we're watching their trends and they're enrolling. We want to go ahead and do a Mercer study. These are the funds that allow them to do that. We don't ask for them unless, well, we ask for them as they're necessary. The commission is down to, they only have a little bit of funds left. They probably have enough money right now to spend on one Mercer study. And it looks like they have a school district that they may be coming up that may need a Mercer study. And at that point, they'll be depleted and won't have any funds at all. So they need some money to be able to operate and do those Mercer studies so they can keep projects rolling.
Thank you.
The next page is page 91. These are the demolition projects. All three of these are in relation to reducing square footage for districts. As we've talked about, there's a lot of excess square footage out in the districts, and they're trying to do some reduction of that. The first project is a demolition of the tech building at Torrington High School in Goshen County. It is a 3,100 square foot building. The high school is at 71% capacity, so that it's not going to affect their ability to do it. It actually, I've seen the drawings, it's in some of the pictures. It's a little, almost like a shed area that's in between the school and their track and their football field. And it's got asbestos and a lot of issues with it. They can't use it for anything else. It was built in '64. They'd like money to demolish it. The cost would be $238,852. The second project on the list is the demolition of the Frontier Learning Center in Laramie 1. This building was purchased in May of 2021. It's an 11,608 square foot building built in 1973. The district had planned to use the facility with a limited remodel. However, code requirements may prevent the space renovation due to major scope work involved with completing the code updates as required by the city of Cheyenne and limited funds to remodel it. So the district believes it would be more feasible to go ahead and demolish the building. The cost of that is $854,959. The third project is the demolition of the Tonkin Activity Center. There was a Mercer study that was initiated in 2017, and they started moving different programs out of the building so they could work towards doing a demolition of that building. And the district currently has over 205,000 excess square feet that they're not getting major maintenance funds for. And this would reduce that by 65,000 square feet. The cost of doing that building is $3,997,583. And as we discussed, I believe back in June, one of the reasons why that one's so expensive is there's a lot of hazardous materials in that building because of the age, and the tipping fees to get rid of those, that waste is very expensive. And that's what really adds to that project. So the total for the demolition projects is listed at $5,091,394. Moving along to the Land Opportunity Fund on page 92. This is a fund that exists for the commission to be able to purchase funds. Like if property adjacent to a school becomes available and they'd like to purchase it, they have to have money available to make that purchase as it becomes available. And so what we're asking for is just to replace the funds that were replenished this biennium, which is a total of $618,351. So that they have funds back in that pot to be available as necessary to take advantage of opportunities as they arise. If there's no questions, we'll move on to page 93, which is the unanticipated. Unanticipated allows, just like we were talking with the Coyote Ridge project, allows projects that are appropriated during that biennium, a pot of money for the commission to be able to dole out if there's some extenuating circumstance or some unanticipated cost that comes up that they need to take care of. We work with the Economic Analysis Division over in A&I to kind of determine a percentage of what we think might work. We did this back in, I think, February was when we started working with them in March, and they had recommended a 6% factor. So that's what we had used for our budgetary figure of the $1.5 million. And that is done as a percentage of all the projects in planning, design, construction, component, demolition, and any track projects that are requested. Director Vincent, did you want to address any of the COVID funds, or do you feel like you've covered that already?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions on this one then?
Continue.
Excellent. We'll move along then to page 94, which are other budget considerations. And as we talked a little bit about earlier, the driver here is really capacity because this is for Little Powder Elementary School up in Campbell. And the lease is going to be ending June 30th of 2026. And the landowner is not intending to renew that lease. So at that point, it will be a capacity issue. So in 2016, there was a Mercer study initiated and they chose new land for a replacement school. In 2020, the commission approved the purchase of that land and with appropriated funds. And so the request here is for the design and construction of a new school, and then also money to demolish the old building, which is per the lease that was signed by the district back in 1971, that they're responsible for clearing the site when the lease was up. And so the total for all of those projects, for all of those things is $6,334,466. So that brings our total budget request to like what we talked about at the executive summary of $212,890,381. There's no other questions on this. We have one more section in the annual report.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on the Little Powder School new construction design. Is that price estimate or cost estimate inclusive of the major increase in construction materials as we are experiencing a handful of pages previous on Coyote Ridge? The square footage doesn't change, but if a 2x4 goes from $2 to $12, what's going to happen to this project?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Representative Walters for your question. It includes some inflationary factor on there, not as much as Coyote Ridge, because as Paul has explained it to me, if you haven't been out the Little Powder, just getting a contractor and materials to go out that far out for a small project, there's already another index that we put on there during the contingency aspect of it to build out small projects in the middle of nowhere. So that and some COVID is built into that money right there, that number. Also knowing that by the time this school would be built, we believe we might be on the downward side of any COVID where the midpoint of construction is. But we already brought small project rural into it as a contingency plus some COVID. So thank you for the question.
Okay. Senator or Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Laura. Just as and you may not have the answer in front of you, but as I was looking back at the previous biennium budget total for this school facilities agency, it was about 234 million, rounding a little bit. And this year we're at about 200 in this proposed budget, about 212 million, with just rounding to the first three digits. Really, when I say that, is that what you're showing is about a roughly very rough estimate, $20 million less this biennium than last?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Walters, I haven't actually done that comparison and looked directly at that, so I
Okay.
couldn't answer. I'll have to trust your figures on that, but that probably sounds right. We're in that ballpark.
I thought we were 52 million over the standard budget.
He's talking about, if I understand the question correctly, he's talking about the entire total, the total package with all the exception requests in it and the standard budget combined. Correct? That's what he's comparing. So he's comparing apples to apples. So even though the exception request would vary from year to year, like some more construction one year, more capacity or conditioned schools, he's just kind of doing a comparison to see where we're at if we're in the ballpark of where we were previously, correct?
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right, Laura, we'll take it home with the deployment schedule.
All right, we'll go back to that and go to the deployment schedule, which is the very last tab on page 94. So you might need a magnifying glass to see some of this. I apologize. It's hard to squish that into a page. So there are two graphs here. On page 95, there's a graph that reflects the capital projects that have been that have an unspent balance on them as of the time that the data was pulled, which when we're preparing the annual report was back in April of this year. And we look at each project and the remaining funds that are on the project. And then we graph it going through the process. If they're in the construction process, they're planning, they're buying land, whatever that process is, there's a color code up at the top right-hand side that you can look at to see what those are. And then we graph those out. And we just kind of keep the burn rate even over the quarters that we think the project will go through. And then on page 96 is another graph, which basically shows the total projected expenditures of the remaining funds by quarter, where we think those are going to get spent at. So if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Can you explain these on page 97, the security line?
Pardon me, I'm sorry, couldn't hear you, Mr. Chairman.
Did on 97, did we cover that page, right? Is that part of the,
Can you tell me which graph it is? I'm sorry, I don't have a page 97 in mind. It's page 96, maybe? It's the blue graph? This one?
Okay, I got different page numbers online. Maybe I've got the old version. 97 of 98, it says it's the green graph with a green line.
That's on our page 95.
Oh, okay, well, it's different on mine, so I probably have an old version. That's the one I want. Would you explain the security line? I mean, all the way out?
Yes, sir. There were a number of years ago, there was, and I apologize, this was pre my position at the agency, there was security money that was actually appropriated by the legislature specifically for security projects. There was an assessment that was done, I believe Representative Walters would probably remember this, that they went through and analyzed the security in the schools and then provided money for it. I believe it was in the neighborhood of $13 million. There was like a $4 million appropriation one year and a $10 million another year, I think, or around that amount. And so some of the school districts are still working on those projects. And that is a combined of all districts, the remaining funds that are left in security accounts at all districts, because we didn't want to put all the districts out every individual one. So we combined them into a security line that shows all the projects.
But you just used the same number for every
Quarter?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We're just basically prorating it. We think the project is going to go from here until this amount of time, but we don't know. We don't have any way of predicting, like if they're going to spend, let's say there's $3 million left. We don't know if they're going to spend all $3 million in the first quarter, or they're going to spend, we're looking at it and we think they're going to spend it over like maybe 4 quarters. We just prorate it out evenly because we don't know exactly where those expenditures are going to hit. It's our best estimate of when those funds are going to be spent. And we do that in all of those. If you look at all of them, they're all prorated out evenly.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of your presentation. Is that correct? Committee, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this is the right spot, but I had a question regarding the sale of school property, and I'm looking at George here. He is more than likely going to be the one that might help me remember where this rests in our statutes or whatever. When we were up for TRW committee, Mr. Chairman, up at Du Bois, I was visiting with a gentleman who said that he had purchased the property of the where the old Du Bois school rested up there. And his intention was to put some low income housing in that community. They're out of houses, they're out of land. There's quite a little boom going on up there. And my question, he said there's a prohibition of 10 years before he can do anything specific with that land. That I've been on this committee a long time and I had never heard that. And so I'm just wondering, Director or Laura, any one of you, if you have a thought on that, I'd sure appreciate it. Otherwise, I've got homework to do. It doesn't seem right that we would allow the sale of that property in the middle of town and then not allow the town to use it. So does that ring any bells at all?
No bells. We thought we were anticipating what your question was going to be, and we were going to tell you what year school districts got to keep the proceeds from sale of property and when it rolled back to you. And we were racing for that chart. We had to hit the brakes. So
Yeah.
this is new to us.
You thought I was going to say, how come we didn't get that money? Well, it's an interesting issue up there.
Like you have some homework to do.
Yeah, it looks like it. So I'm looking at George, in case you run into something, please share it with me.
I'm like you, I have not heard of any way there would be any prohibition issued from the state or from the school district. I don't know if there's a possibility that it could be some kind of a planning zoning kind of situation up there? I'm not sure.
That's a good thought, Mr. Chairman. It actually could have fallen over into a city council issue that he failed to mention or whatever, but thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions on the budget request? Or not the budget, but the annual report? Okay, I'd like to open this topic up for public comment. If there's anyone out there that would like to comment on the annual report by the School Facilities Commission. Anyone online? Okay, thank you. All right. Oh, do we have one comment? We do. Dennis, please. You have the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dennis Holmes, Associate Superintendent for Instructional Support, Campbell County. I would just like to thank the Lauren, Jerry, George for their presentation. And certainly thank you, the committee members, for your support and endorsement, but nothing but thanks at this point. So thank you.
Okay, you bet. All righty, that brings us to the next item, which is a break. So I'm gonna call for a 10-minute break here. We'll come back at 25 minutes before 4. No, we're not. We have the budget request yet to do, right?
That's what this was.
Commission, oh, yeah, you're right. We're done.
Yeah, it's just a motion to.
So we're ahead of time?
Yeah.
Well,
Look at you, Mr.
how
Chair.
did that
Finish
happen?
them out.
You, Mr. Chair.
I'm willing to circumvent the break.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not counting my items right. I didn't check off the last one. Okay. All right, so we're to the point of committee directives to staff. Committee, I know we had some thoughts earlier.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Rothfuss.
I move that we request that staff direct a standalone bill reflecting the proposed budget as presented today by the department for consideration at our next meeting, inclusive of the earlier motion with regard to the Fremont Auditorium.
Second,
Sounds good. We have a second here.
yes, I seconded
We do have a second, Senator Brown. Okay, any discussions, committee?
Mr. Chairman, just
Here.
for purposes of clarification, in previous years, the operations, the engineering and technical, major maintenance, those 3 items belong in the agency 27 budget in section 2, rather than the standalone bill. So when it comes back to you and you don't see those items, that's why.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We good with that? Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, another thing, just to refresh memories, often we have mirrored the items contained in this particular bill in the budget bill. And I'm looking down at one of our appropriators now. We'll have to see how that goes, but sometimes we will fold that into the budget just as a stopgap measure more than anything, or to assure that the right kind of consideration is given to it. So we can watch that as it goes, and leadership and our chairman can make that decision later.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Rothfuss?
Yeah, and on that point, that I think in recent years, we've kind of gone with the best practice of us putting together and sponsoring that standalone piece of legislation, putting it together with amendments as we see fit. And then it ends up getting forwarded, obviously, and the Joint Appropriations Committee takes into consideration and then does often roll it into the budget. But I think as most appropriate practice, us working it as a standalone is most effective. So
Okay.
I agree with my good friend here.
Good. Any other further comments? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Say no. Okay. Staff has the direction. Any other further directives that the committee would like to ask the staff to look into?
You were gonna change the
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. I actually am going to open the floor to any public comment that's not related to any of the issues we discussed. So if there's any public comment out there for any reason?
Uh,
Just want to open that up.
Senator Cost just text messaged me, would like to be recognized.
Oh, okay. I guess I haven't seen his hand up. Okay.
It's been kind of tough to see him, so.
Yeah, okay. Anything? I don't see any, okay, so we'll close that public comment. Senator Cost, you had your hand up?
Well, we'll put it this way. I did at one point, but we're way past that now, so we're okay.
Oh, I apologize if we missed something. It's really hard to see him up there.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for the good of the cause here before we adjourn? One, Senator, you want to bring up the location? Okay, we had discussed earlier to have our final meeting in Casper again, although discussion with staff and with the director and myself and the two co-chairmen, we would like to move the meeting to Cheyenne for the final meeting. Because we would like to see you come to the capital city for the meeting. Yeah. So anyhow, the
Not all of
Oh.
us are on appropriate.
final meeting, unless there's a good reason to come back here, we'll hold it in Cheyenne. It is a good reason.
Killing us.
I know. Okay, so plan on meeting on October 20th in Cheyenne. October 20th. Okay. All right. Well, with that.